This is Jay Rogers. I'm the director of The Forerunner, also author of In the Days of These Kings, the Book of Daniel and Preterist Perspective, and the Prophecy of Daniel and Preterist Perspective, the easy parts and the hard parts. One's a long book, one's a short book. Go on lulu.com, you can see the ticker below and so on. In the last video, we went over what some of the church fathers thought about Daniel chapter 2, and I said that Justin Martyr influenced Irenaeus and then Hippolytus in coming up with this model for what has become known as dispensational futurism, or futurist dispensationalism, futurist premillennialism. Dispensationalism is another form of premillennialism that's kind of prevalent today, but they were classic premillennialists who looked at Daniel chapter 2. They thought that the stone made without hands was actually Jesus Christ and not the kingdom of God, even though the text says literally that it's the kingdom of God. We're going to look at a couple of other people that definitely had another view, as well as Justin Martyr. And the reason why I wanted to start with Justin Martyr in this video is because Justin was very influential toward both Irenaeus of Lyon and also later Hippolytus of Rome. So they were kind of like in the same area. I don't know if they knew each other, but they definitely had influence on each other and they knew each other's work. Justin of Rome, otherwise known as Justin Martyr, was the first Christian apologist to write an extended discourse in which numerous books of the Bible are quoted. Okay, prior to that, we had the church fathers who wrote some epistles. Ignatius wrote 7 epistles, Polycarp wrote 1, Clement of Rome wrote 1. They quoted the Bible extensively too, but this was the first person that was defending the faith toward pagans that really went into the Old Testament and so on. And so Justin mainly drew from the Old Testament prophecies to show Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God. And he was trying to show pagans that Jesus would come and he'd rule on earth in Jerusalem. And he saw a premillennial second coming in Revelation 20. All right. However, Justin also provides us with important information that not all Christians of the 2nd century were premillennialists. And this is kind of important because we have, people like, this is a book by Tommy Ice and Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye is the author of the Left Behind series, and Tommy Ice is the author of several books defending dispensationalism. And he makes the comment in this book that there isn't a shred of evidence that there are any Christians early on, like early 2nd century, 1st century, that believed in post-millennial view of the book of Revelation, and there are no preterist views either. In response to that, there's this book, Revelation in the 1st Century, which is goes through and lists all of the fathers, that church fathers and later apologists and other pre-Nicene fathers, post-Nicene fathers that use preterist views in their writing. So it's worthwhile looking into. Don't just believe claims. Go in and actually read church fathers for yourself. And I really recommend this book. This is Francis Gummerlock. It's Revelation in the 1st Century. I could not have done my book on Daniel without some of the resources that he pointed to. He's very good at compiling a lot of resources in a short book, and then you can go and explore it on your own if you're that type of person. So Justin is famous for a book called The Dialogue with Trypho, and he met a man in Ephesus, a Jew named Trypho, and he is debating with Justin over Christianity versus Judaism. Okay. Trypho had fled the Third Roman Jewish War. There was a Jewish war in AD 70, then another one in, what the exact date, around 115, I think it was. And then there was a third one between 131 and I think 134. And he was interested to know, do Christians believe that Jerusalem would be rebuilt during the millennium? And so according to Justin, there was a competing view on this at the time. Some Christians believe, like Papias is another, who believed that there would be an earthly Jerusalem during the millennium, and Jesus would rule from Jerusalem prior to the judgment. So there would be like a second coming of Christ, an earthly millennium, and then after that, a final judgment. That's the premillennial view. Christ comes prior to the millennium, reigns on earth during the millennium, and then there's a resurrection of the dead, and also the final judgment, and then the final state. So according to Justin, there was a competing view. This is what Justin asks. I remarked to you, sir, that you are very anxious to be safe. Oops. And I'm jumping around here. Okay. You are very anxious to be safe in all respects, since you cling to scriptures. I'm just going to move this so I can read it better. But tell me, do you really admit that this place, Jerusalem, shall be rebuilt? And do you expect your people to be gathered together and made joyful with Christ and the patriarchs and the prophets, and both the men of our nation and other proselytes who had joined them before your Christ came? So this is Jerusalem had been completely destroyed by the Romans, and the Jews were looking for it to be rebuilt in fulfillment of the scriptures, and Christians were looking for that as well. Justin, I am not so miserable a fellow, Trypho. Justin says, I am not so miserable a fellow, Trypho, as to say one thing and think another. I admitted to you formally that I and many others are of this opinion, talking about premillennialism, and believe that such will take place, as you assuredly are aware. But on the other hand, I have signified to you that many who belong to the pure and pious faith and are true Christians think otherwise. But I and others who are right-minded Christians on all points are assured that there will be a resurrection of the dead, followed by 1,000 years in Jerusalem, which will be rebuilt, adorned, enlarged, as the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah and others declare. So there's a resurrection of the dead, followed by 1,000-year reign, followed by, I guess, another resurrection of the dead. It's a little bit unclear what type of premillennialism he believed in, but 2 points are brought out here. First, at the time of the writing, Justin admits that there were true Christians who dissented with the premillennial view. We don't know who he was referring to specifically, but they certainly existed. They could have been people like Clement of Alexandria, which we'll get into in a little bit here, or people that taught Clement of Alexandria. But they certainly existed in the mid-2nd century. Second, Justin considers the competing amillennial position to be thoroughly orthodox. I call it amillennial because postmillennialism is, these words, postmillennialism, premillennialism, like I said earlier in my other videos, these are later terms, but like the blanket generic word is amillennial, and postmillennial is a more optimistic view of that. So he essentially states that it's not necessary to believe that Jesus will be reign for 1,000 years from a rebuilt earthly Jerusalem in order to be a true Christian. However, Justin Martyr himself believed Revelation 20 taught an earthly, literal view of the millennium. Okay, and then he goes on. So we have Justin. All right, he believed that the stone cut without hands in Daniel 2 was all. He also references that when talking with Trypho. He shows he believed the stone symbolized Jesus Christ and not the kingdom of God. And he's arguing about the pagan mysteries. And when those who record the mysteries of Mithras say he was begotten of a rock and call the place where those who believe in him are initiated a cave, I do not perceive here that utterance of Daniel that a stone... Do I not perceive that the utterance of Daniel that a stone without hands was cut out of a great mountain has been imitated by them? So he's saying that the Mithraists were imitating the Christians by saying that he was cut out of a rock, that Jesus was cut out of a rock. Okay, now, the preterist view of Daniel 2:44 says that this is already happened. In other words, the kingdom of God was the rock that was the stone that was cut out of the mountain, the little stone that be cast to the earth, destroyed the kingdoms of this world, or at least scattered them to the winds, and then all nations flocked into the kingdom of God, and this stone grew into a great mountain. Ignatius of Antioch is one of the earliest church fathers. He was born around 35, and lived until 117, around those dates. And he was in Antioch, maybe one of the children of the converts at Antioch when Peter preached there. We don't know exactly, but he was one of the bishops in the line of succession in Antioch. In the letter to the Magnesians, there is contained one quote from Daniel 2:44, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. Okay, so what that shows in context of what he wrote is he saw that Daniel 2:44 pointed to the kingdom of God at the time of Christ's first advent and not the second coming. So that's very early. We don't know what Ignatius of Antioch's eschatology is. In my book, I have an argument that he may have been the earliest postmillennialist. We don't know. There isn't enough to go on it, but he was very optimistic about the kingdom. Okay, and you can get my book and read that part if you're interested. Jesus Christ being begotten by the Father before the beginning of time was God the Word, the only begotten Son, and remains forever. For of his kingdom there shall be no end, says Daniel the prophet. So I made that emphasis to show that, Jesus Christ has come into the world, and then of his kingdom there shall be no end. And so he apparently believed that the kingdom had come into this world as well. Okay, the next one is Clement of Alexandria, and this is significant because he was a contemporary of Irenaeus and Hippolytus. At least of Irenaeus, he preceded Hippolytus by a few years. And he was a convert to Christianity. Pantanus, if I'm saying that correctly, was a convert to Christianity and became a teacher at Alexandria and later took the gospel eastward as far as India. One of Pantanus' students was named Clement of Alexandria. So you had Christians in Egypt very early on. There's a legend that Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, Gospel according to Mark, was in Alexandria, and there was a school founded there. Okay, very early school of Christ in Alexandria. It's a big Jewish Mecca, along with Babylon and many other cities in the Roman Empire, Jerusalem obviously too. So one of his students was Clement of Alexandria. He developed the Christian library in that city and founded a school that became a key intellectual center for Christianity in the centuries to come. So you can get a partial preterist view from Clement, and he wrote this book called the Stromata of miscellaneous writings of Clement of Alexandria that were put together in one book. That was written around AD 180. I've heard that it was later, AD 200, but it was earlier than Hippolytus. Okay, the first full-known commentary on Revelation was by Victorinus of Pitau, and he used Clement of Alexandria's scheme for Daniel in interpreting Revelation. Okay, so contrary to the claim that preterism is a recent invention, by the Jesuits or some other aberration, the preterist view has a strong pedigree tracing back to the early church fathers. Preterism is not a strange new doctrine, but a view that is being reclaimed and retaught in our day. Now, Clement does not have any statements on the stone, but when we get into Daniel chapter 7, he wrote quite extensively on Daniel chapter 7. Now, Tertullian was a premillennialist. He was Tertullian of Carthage. He, again, another contemporary of Clement, who lived around the same time. And Tertullian was also a premillennialist. So Tertullian, Clement, and Hippolytus were around the same time. Irenaeus was a little bit earlier, and then Justin was a little bit earlier than that. So he repeats so Tertullian is very much in the school of Justin Martyr and Irenaeus. He believes there'll be a future Antichrist. But unlike Justin and Irenaeus, he identified the stone cut without hands to be the church at the first advent, not the second coming. So not the kingdom specifically, but the church. And the church and the kingdom are different, but he didn't see it as being the second coming of Christ. He saw it as being the first advent. And we'll also see another interpretation of Daniel when Tertullian links the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming of Vespasian to the 70 weeks, which is Daniel 9. Okay, so it's important to note that Hippolytus, Tertullian, and Clement were contemporaries. They wrote interpretations of Daniel around the same time, yet they used significantly different methods. Hippolytus and Tertullian mixed futurist, idealist, and partial preterist methods, while Clement's interpretation was more straightforwardly preterist. This shows that preterist interpretations were already well developed in the 2nd century. So from this time onward, the preterist view became a competing method of interpreting biblical prophecy, starting with Revelation, Zechariah, Matthew 24, and the book of Revelation. So when did the kingdom of God come? That's the issue here. The kingdom of God was at hand when Jesus began to preach. That's Mark 1:15. That was in the days of the Roman Empire. So the kingdom of God overcame the Roman Empire and the kingdoms of this world, and it will last forever. That's the message of Daniel chapter 22. So the whole context of Daniel 2 is to point to the coming of the Messiah's kingdom in the days of these kings. And that is in the days of the Roman Caesars in the 1st century. Now, it's very important to get that. If you get that in Daniel chapter 2, that becomes the template for the rest of Daniel. It also helps us to interpret books like Zechariah, Matthew 24, Revelation. So rather than trying to look at those scriptures from a futurist end times premillennial view and then retrofitting Daniel to fit retrofitting the prophecies in Daniel to align with those prophecies, what we need to do instead is get Daniel chapter 2, 44 and 45 correct. Take it for what it says. This is the kingdom of God that came into the world in the days of these kings. When was that? It was in the time when the Messiah came. And so that's my teaching on Daniel 2, and I'm going to do 3, 4, and 5, and 6 next. I have some materials on that in my book. I mainly focus on the prophecies, but there's a lot of really interesting things that I found out historically about those chapters. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. But God bless, and like I said, like and subscribe. Send the video to a friend if you were interested in this. And my books are available at Lulu. And my one book, In the Days of These Kings, I'll show you this right here. I have some on hand. If you buy it through my website and send me a note, I can autograph it for you if you're interested. All right. Thank you, and God bless.